words. Thank you, Lou. Hi, everybody. So welcome along to Monday or Tuesday, depending where you are in the world. Welcome on to the morning or the evening, wherever you are in the world. We're going to engage in the Dharma teaching. We're going to do some prayers together. We're going to set our motivation together. And we're going to talk about the Dharma together. But let's begin by first being present, getting comfortable. So please move about in your seat until you feel quite settled in it, comfortable in it. Your back should be sort of straight and shoulders relaxed. You can place your hands wherever you like. And you can keep your eyes open or close them. And while you continue to breathe normally and naturally, I'd like you to become aware of the movements that take place within your body as you inhale and exhale breath. The mind itself is gently focused upon the movements taking place within your body every time you inhale or exhale the breath. And while your mind is focused upon those movements, I want you to recognize the gradual relaxation response of the body. The body is relaxing, and the mind is focused upon that relaxation response. But being focused and relaxed, it's very easy to imagine the presence of all the enlightened beings in the space above the crown of your head. So think of them as being the supports for your practice. They're here to encourage you in the practice of Dharma. But also imagine that you're surrounded by all the sentient beings, all creatures with consciousness. And amongst them are your parents, your relatives, your family, close friends. There are some difficult people there, people we've had misunderstandings with. And vastly outnumbering these two categories of sort of friends and difficult people are strangers. I think that all these people at one stage or another, throughout their countless lives, have been parents to you, or have been your children. And what you'd like to do is to repay their kindness. I think that what you'd really like to do is to attain full enlightenment, the development of your compassion and your wisdom and your abilities to help them and to help yourself. So sort of say to yourself, yes, I want to become a Buddha, a fully awakened being. And I want to do this for the sake of others. And to accomplish this goal I've set for myself and others, I'm going to rely on others who have done that, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, the enlightened beings in the space above me. And this is the very best way I can take the essence of this life. But so please join me in saying, I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And in response to this wish of ours, think that lights and nectars pour out of the heart of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas and the enlightened beings above you. This light and nectar comes down and washes away any type of obstacle that hinders your own spiritual progress and the spiritual progress over all the beings surrounding you. The obscurations vanish, realizations increase. The one realization that increases is the wish that others have a boundless sense of love, boundless compassion, boundless joy, and boundless equanimity. We also know we need to develop this for ourselves. So bringing to mind the four immeasurable or boundless thoughts, join me in saying, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is without suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. In response to this wish of ours, again, lights and nectars pour out of the heart of the Buddha above you, out of the heart of each bodhisattva and each enlightened being. Lights and nectars pour down through space. They wash over your physical and mental continuum. Same thing happens to all the beings surrounding you. And every obstacle to these four boundless thoughts is washed away. And you find you have immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. And so do all the beings surrounding you. And then with a sense of joy and a sense of devotion, you look up to the field of merit above you. And you say, reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own and others' merits to the great enlightenment. So to prevent ourselves from clinging to the accumulation of virtue and the purification of all good deeds, all the negativities and the ripening of all the good, we recollect emptiness, and we see that everything that does exist does so as a dependent arising. We see the utter transformation of our body into a universal system that we offer to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas above us. And we say, this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Mary, floor contents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. This mandala has been released and accepted by the Buddha and his entourage. And the Buddha smiles at us with delight. Let me look up into his eyes. See the great compassion. You can see that we're accepted by him. And a sense of ease and joy pervade the mind. And then a little emanation of the Buddha leaves his heart, and it moves through space and comes to abide above the crown of your head, facing the same direction you are. The emanation begins to descend. It enters the crown of your head, comes down through your body, and stops at the level of your heart, whereby its radiance begins to increase, filling your body and mind with light. And light begins to push up against the inner surface of your skin, and then goes out through the pores of your skin and begins to fill the 10 directions of space. And as sentient beings pervade space, this light touches each and every one of them and utterly transforms them into the fully awakened state. And there's no difference between ourselves and others. In fact, we can see quite clearly that others and self are mere conceptions, ideas. It's this vast openness and cognizance and knowing. And from the furthest reaches of space, the light begins to withdraw and re-enters your heart, drawn into the heart. You find yourself breathing normally and naturally. You feel the seat beneath you, and you know you are embodied. And you're breathing normally and naturally. And you recognize that this meditation was one of imagination. But nevertheless, it has imprinted the mind with this potential. Meditations act as a condition for our awakening. So rejoice in that. And then acknowledge the work that we have to do to contribute to those conditions and think, I'm going to do that. And then breathe in through your nostrils and exhale through your mouth. And allow your eyes to flutter open. And move your body in whichever way you'd like to, until you feel quite present and ready to begin. Okay, so let's see where we go. So we're going to start this course on compassion, but it's also about empathy.
Can you just stop the share for a moment because you're really quiet, I can't hear. Sorry, just so you can keep speaking.
Empathy, intelligence, and inspiration. And you just have to wait a moment.
I just difficulty hearing you. Okay, so here we go. We'll go back again. Right.
So, and so our course, sorry, is based around this particular book. So some of you might be aware of this book or the other books that are in the series. So you can see it, it's this is volume 5 in a series called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And this is such a great series of books, this series. And I keep using it to present the courses because it's so readable, it's really wide, but it's also quite in depth too. So I've used a lot of the material from this book, and I've just put this one up this time. If you've been doing courses with me before, often I have 5 or 6 books, but today's everything's just based on this book. And what we're going to be talking about is primarily what compassion is and what it's not. And that's what we're going to sort of cover today. We're going to look at what's not compassion, what compassion is, the ordinary compassion, excuse me, this ordinary compassion that we have, that we can use to as a foundation to build up extraordinary or great compassion, and how we might be able to do that over time. So we'll do a meditative exercise today, showing how we can build on our ordinary compassion. So I thought I'd begin by first of all showing like what compassion is not, and what it's often been thought to be. And it was only in recent years that we discovered that there's quite a difference between compassion and empathy. So there's sort of like 3 forms of empathy. There might be even more. So I just want to sort of briefly put them up here, and then we'll talk about them in a little bit more depth.
Sorry, I'm being very distracting for you.
So our first type of compassion is called emotional or somatic or affective compassion. Oh, sorry, empathy. Gosh, I'm blowing this, aren't I? Emotional empathy, somatic empathy, empathic empathy. And then we have another type, cognitive empathy. So the first has more to do with the feeling. This one here has more to do with thinking. And then there's another form of empathy called compassionate empathy. Let's have a look at the first one, this emotional or somatic empathy. And first of all, this is not compassion. So what I've done here, is a couple of pictures here. You can see on one side there's a man's head and face, and a woman's head and face, and there's a swirling of color between the two. And this is really to put up to show you this sort of emotional resonance you can have with others. So it's this capacity to share and feel the emotions experienced by another person. There's emotional empathy is sort of characterized by a sense of emotional mirroring, or, well, I've read contagious emotion. So what they're sort of getting at here is the idea that like I feel terrible, you know I feel terrible, and you start feeling terrible too. Has anybody had that sort of experience before? Yeah, I think it's quite common, isn't it? So this is just what we call, we're sort of, I'm going to say sharing. There's a sense of resonance between what I feel and you feel.
Don't they, Eddie, don't they call it like there's even a popular term called mirroring neurons, even though the neuroscientists say that there is no such thing as mirror neurons, but it's a concept that people have that we just mirror like that.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's only a few of us here. So could, I mean, must have happened to all of us. So could anybody think of an example where you've actually felt this sort of emotional empathy?
I've got an embarrassing example, Eddie. When I watched the house renovation shows and they renovate somebody's house as a surprise, and then the people come in at the end and then they're all crying and I get all teary.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying that, how I get it when I watch the medical shows. You know, so when they do the cutting or the, you know, sometimes they get inside people's bodies and they're pushing stuff around. And I'm going, oh, I'm nearly unbearable in the bed. I get this really sort of physical response. I have to close my eyes and things like that, right? So I'm pretty sure we've all had a similar type of experience before. So that's this sort of empathy we're talking about here. We'll have a look at the next one. Is that right? Share. Yeah. Next one is what's called cognitive empathy. So again, this is also not compassion. So this is referring to our ability to understand and intellectually grasp the other person's emotions and perspective. So it involves sort of accurately perceiving and comprehending what someone else is going through, what their emotional state is. And you can even imagine yourself being in that situation, but you don't get that feeling aspect of it. So an example of this is if you can imagine a person named Alex who's lost their job. Now with cognitive empathy, we understand the situation they're in. So we understand, we can comprehend the challenges they face, perhaps even the financial stress they put under and their feelings of uncertainty. So we accurately perceive that, we understand it, but we're not really going through it. We don't, you know, it's like to say here, oh, I understand. I feel I'm so sorry for you. Right? But that whole affective state that was present in the other is not present here. So I remember, I think it was one of our presenters came and the example that they gave was cognitive empathy is that a torturer can have cognitive empathy with their victim. So they're hurting them and they know they're hurting them, right? But they're not feeling hurt by it. They're not getting the same responses that the poor victim is. It's like this, yes, I understand your suffering, and I'm not, right?
Eddie, it seems like in that situation, it seems to me like in that situation, they might be enjoying it.
Yeah, sometimes they do.
Rather than feeling cognitive empathy.
Yeah, there's a little, I've got a slide coming up, Susan, that's a little bit about this. You know, so what's sort of saying here, this empathy is like the torturer has to sort of know the other person is being hurt. They are being hurt. So from the torturer's perspective, they're successful.
And the thing about cognitive empathy is that you understand and you know what's going on, but you're not feeling the pain. Like you said, Susan, you could be actually enjoying their suffering, but you have a spot on understanding about how to make them suffer.
And so this is not, of course, I just use suffer. This idea that it's quite an extreme example. Another one where this is, you want cognitive empathy is you want people to be accessing that state, especially if they're doctors, nurses, and the healing professions. You want them to understand that you are suffering, and you don't want them to be affected like the other way. Like my example, I sit there and watch somebody being cut open and hands going in the body, and I'm sort of cringing, I can't watch. We don't want our doctors and our nurses to be like that, do we? We want them to know, poor Eddie, he's suffering, and I can still work and help and things like that. But it doesn't affect you so much on the emotional level, although you do know there's something going on here.
Eddie, would this be an example of cognitive empathy? And it's like the situation like with Donald Trump. I feel empathy, maybe cognitive empathy, that maybe he had a bad childhood. He felt unloved. His father gave him the wrong messages and all that. But I still really want him to go to jail.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep, yes, that's a good example of it, Susan. Yeah. Yeah, you understand. Let's have a look at our next one called compassionate empathy. So this is a strange one for me when I was researching this. So I was quite familiar with this cognitive and the previous one. And now I thought, now there's just compassion, right? So compassion goes against these two. Then I come up with this other form of empathy called compassionate empathy, and it's still not compassion. And so we'll put this up and we'll talk a little bit about it. So compassion and compassionate empathy are two related concepts, but they have distinct differences. So compassionate empathy refers to the ability to understand and share the feelings of the other person. And it does often involve feeling their pain or suffering alongside them. It's like that idea of put yourself in somebody else's shoes. On the other hand, the compassion, so we've got this little difference, refers to like sort of feeling a deep concern and care for the suffering of others and having a desire to alleviate that suffering. But it doesn't mean to say you're walking in their shoes. In terms of the emotional experience, compassionate empathy involves sort of mirroring the emotions of others and experiencing them as your own. And it can be really intense and can sometimes, or even often, lead to this thing that we used to call compassion burnout. But this has been like an emotional exhaustion. Especially when you're constantly exposed to others' pain. So I think a lot of people would go through this, like if you're caring for elderly parents or you're caring for children who might be afflicted with some sort of disease and there's no cure. And we know of many, many parents or brothers and sisters who have that sort of role, that caregiving role, right? And you go, and it can wear you down. As anybody who's done it will know. So it's often recommended you get assistance, you ask for help yourself, because it's so debilitating over a long time. So compassionate empathy also requires seeing things from the other person's perspective and, like I said, deeply understanding their feelings. It aims to establish a connection and promote a sense of shared understanding. But compassion, on the other hand, includes an understanding of the other's suffering. It does not necessarily require fully immersing themselves in their perspective. It rather emphasizes the desire to help or to alleviate the suffering, rather than directly experiencing it yourself. So our next slide is just sort of like a summary of these two to show the sort of difference between compassionate empathy and compassion itself. You can see with compassionate empathy, we've got this full experience of it, and we're really sort of sharing their emotional states. Now, if you've been in these situations, you'll know how hard it is when it's like that. You sort of become debilitated, just like the person you're caring for.
So,
yeah.
Eddie, is this sometimes like if you yourself have experienced the trauma and then someone close to you, the same terrible thing happens to them, so you really feel for them, but you're all triggered yourself and overwhelmed by it as well?
Yeah, that's one I'd say is an example of it.
Because, often that can happen where you really feel for the people, but you almost become incapable of helping because you're so overwhelmed by re-experiencing those emotions.
Yeah, and at the same time, you're trying to help. Right? You can still even make an effort to help here, but this is going on for you. And you'll know if you've ever been in that situation how quickly you can become angry or quickly discouraged. And whereas on the compassion side, it's really sort of coming out of a sense of kindness and deep concern and an actual desire. Gee, I'm sorry, I've got to alleviate. So it's been a while, hasn't it? You can see all sorts of funny things going on. So here I just want to show you, so this is, you can see a difference here a bit more clearly. Like I said, so these are sort of, so I remember a number of years ago when in response to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's conversations with the scientists up at Dharamsala, many of
Eddie,
the...
just stop the share while you're
sorry,
telling a story.
Yeah. So many of the advanced meditators, put themselves into those sort of machines. They've got their brains wired up, and then they ask them different questions and ask them to cultivate different emotional states. So I think this is a story about with Matteo Ricard. So they asked him to develop empathy, to consciously develop empathy, and they gave him these different pictures to look at. And of course, what happened was these pictures were all people suffering in different distress states. And so so he did that, and they recorded what is the brain waves and so forth. And then it was just about to come up to lunch, and he was going to stop and then have a break for lunch. So the scientist said, "Oh, okay, thank you. Let's go and have a break for lunch." And then Matthew said, "You go for lunch. I'm just going to do a bit of compassion meditation. Then I'll come for lunch." And this really shocked the scientists because they thought, well, we're talking about the same thing, empathy and compassion. They're the same thing. So there's a little bit of surprise for them to hear Matthew saying, there's a difference obviously here. So they waited, and what they found was the brain waves were very different from when they did empathy and then when they did compassion. It was like the scientific evidence to say, oh my gosh, we've been fusing these two words together and having the understanding of it, it's the same thing. and then discovering through, like, so evidentially, they're quite different states. So this idea of some of the other idea you might have heard of is what they call your compassion burnout. It's like this thing, you're caring too much for them. You've got to care for yourself. So it becomes like a caring, you can care for the other, or you can care for yourself. Because if you just keep caring for the others, you're going to burn out. And the burnout does take place, but it's not because of the compassion, it's because of the empathy, especially the affective empathy, the somatic empathy, that first slide we put up. It's like walking in the other's shoes, very tiring, emotionally exhausting.
And so then, Eddie, the meditation that Matthew Ricard did then on compassion, so it was really a whole different thing, not as distressing, or?
Yeah, no idea is distressing. In fact, he came out of it quite invigorated again. And what the empathy was very distressing and debilitating, made him very sort of tired. And so he sort of woke himself up and becoming reinvigorated with compassion.
So if we kind of refer to having compassion burnout, then we're really doing ourselves a disservice, because that's the thing that won't burn us out. It's the empathy that burns us out.
So the object is the same. It's like somebody who's suffering, but it's just the mental state we develop in response to the object, the other person or situation. It's quite different.
But it's very hard to draw a line between them, because if you're caring for somebody, you feel, compassionate empathy for them, but you also feel compassion for them.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
So it's blended, and it's very difficult to separate.
Yeah, so this is the idea of trying to present this material to talk about it, so we can, over time, sort of see where we can differentiate. So, right now, this is affective empathy, or this is just more on the empathy side than the compassion side, and just try and recognize what's going on within ourselves. But yeah, so this is why I sort of want to share this information, amongst us, so that we can sort of work out what's going on with us. If I'm being really burnt out, if I'm really getting tired and cranky, well, that's more the coming out of the empathy side. So we need empathy. We're not saying don't have empathy. Empathy is necessary. But like empathy is sort of getting you to the, it's like looking into a room, right? So you're looking into the room, you're seeing somebody there, and they're suffering in some way. You recognize that. So this is the empathy part. Right? Compassion gets you to walk into the room. So I just want to sort of how you can sort of differentiate. When you walk in the room with compassion, it's a different mental state than the one of empathy. Empathy is, you want empathy to push you into compassion.
So Eddie, is it like one is more observing and then the other is more acting, doing?
Yeah, there's the there is the observational factor involved, but there's also the affective, the feeling, the emotional impact. Right? So that's there. But we don't want to leave it there and then just have that. It's like that. Compassion is like, I'm going to act on that. Whether I actually act on it verbally, physically, or mentally, that's entirely up to you and what you can do. Because you can do either, couldn't you? If you're actually looking after your mum or your dad or your child or somebody you cared for, well, can I get you a cup of tea? Are you okay, dear? You're ready to work. You're ready to do whatever's required of you. So that'd be the compassion side of it.
But that would be compassionate empathy, walking into the room, committing to help. That would be compassionate empathy. So would one of the big differences then between just pure compassion and compassionate empathy be with compassion, you feel it for yourself too, and you know when to stop, put a not barrier, but like protect yourself so that you can go on helping the other person.
Yep. So that what you're saying there, that one there, that's like the compassionate empathy, where you have this where you know you've got to put up a barrier to help the other person. Yep. So you'd be feeling it all, you'd be affected and so forth. You've got this whole emotional response to them. There's the willingness to help them. And there's this thing that goes, I've got to look after myself here. So all of that is part of this compassionate empathy.
But yet that leads to burnout. So that means we're not taking care of ourselves.
Well, if you, like I said, if you are bringing in this idea that if I'm here, I feel this way, I'm trying to help them this way, and yet there's still the knowledge, like I've got to look after myself, I've got to be like careful, like you say, so like this boundary that we set up. Right? This is all compassionate empathy.
And so then actual just compassion is a step on from that?
Yeah, that's right. Compassion is beyond that.
Right.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting when I was trying to work this out. I was asking myself, so what's the difference here? So I had to sort of put in using the artificial intelligence to go, and what's the difference between this type of empathy and compassion? What's the difference? Putting up all the different things and looking through them and trying to work it out. I go, okay, here's the best I can do with it. I'll share this with you. But you can, like you say, want to play around with this understanding, put it in, go, okay, tell me what affectionate compassion is. Tell me what compassion is. Now tell me what the differences are. Where are these differences? And you can find out. You'll do the search for you and break it all down, and you can sort of go, try and get a bit of understanding of it. So here we come to so now we're going to have a look at compassion itself. And I found this quite interesting because one of the definitions they gave, so this is a definition from the Pali, and the term for compassion there, or one of the terms was anukampa. Anukampa. And etymologically, it means to be moved in response to others. I've sort of found that quite interesting, moved in response to others. So that's what I'll sort of call this next slide. So compassion moves in response. And so I'll break it down. So this is this lovely thing from this book, we can look at, so the aspect of we can ask, what's the aspect of compassion? And it goes to allay suffering, to you want to reduce the suffering of the other, or to stop it, or to stop the other person's suffering, just to put an end to suffering. So that's really the aspect of this compassion. And like I said, its function is to find others' suffering to be unbearable. The way it manifests is through non-cruelty, non-harmfulness. And it's a near cause. I mean, what drives you to do it is to see the distress in the other. When you're successful at this, it reduces the hurt and pain and suffering that the other person is going through. So it reduces the cruelty. When you fail at it, personal distress. You are personally distressed. So like you're saying, Susan, before, so here's a really good indicator, isn't it? Wow, if I'm personally distressed by this is not the pure compassion. This has got to be mixed up with one of those forms of empathy. And that's probably, we've got to often take like a deep breath and then try and come back out here. I'm trying to help the other, but my own emotions are getting in the way. I'm becoming distressed.
So Eddie, how you mentioned the brain waves are different between compassionate empathy and compassion. What does that mean then? How are they different? How does that manifest that they're different?
It shows that they're different mental states.
But how is compassion different? Is it like it's more calm and relaxed?
Well, yeah. So if you the other is more different because there's so much. It's got a lot to do with us, right? Us being affected by the emotional state of the other.
But also, Eddie, I think one of the things about Matthew Ricard that he said was that when he then went to meditate on compassion, and so he went from being in a distressed state and really exhausted to feeling calm and invigorated again, and that was a lot because compassion is an activity. So you get all your agency back again. You can now do something. So instead of feeling helpless and frustrated and torn apart, the moment you can do something, your whole emotional state changes. So it's not as distressing.
And as I just saying that, so what so on one side it's like, if I'm going to say, so we want to do something, or we're getting done by something. Right? So what I'm saying is we're getting done by our own emotional states, whereas here we're going to do something. We're going to use the sense of calmness, the wish we see that I have to do something. And it drives you forward rather than sort of knocking you back.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That makes it way more clear for me.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're asking these questions, Susan. This is what, I mean, it's like I said, it's been for centuries. So for a long time, people have been thinking, we've all been thinking, empathy and compassion are one and the same thing. Right? So that's right. So it gets a little bit hard then, doesn't it? Go, well, what's the difference? So we get some sort of intellectual difference, but then we've got to bring it back to our own experience. So, like I said, so one of the things is this idea of personal distress. So we've sort of crossed the line. We've gone back into the more affective states. We're not being very, we're not being as effective as we could be because our own feelings and emotions are affecting us, just like the other person is being affected by theirs. Now there are, so like I said, so we've confused empathy with compassion. There's a couple of other mental states that are very close to compassion. They might even look like compassion, but in fact they're not. But just like empathy is not. But there are other mental states that are like that too. And then there are mental states that are definitely not compassion. So they call these the near and the far enemies of compassion. And I first came across these terms through reading Alan Wallace's work. So he put forward this idea that, you might think you're being compassionate, but in fact you're not. So empathy is one of those states, right? I mean, it's a doorway to compassion, but it's not compassion. Let's have a look at these, what they call the near and the far enemies. So here is what they call a near enemy. So the near enemy is so close to it, you might not be able to recognize it as an actual enemy. You actually think it's a friend. So to pity the other person or to be sort of sentimental about it. So pity like resembles compassion because it involves feeling sorry for someone suffering, but it sort of lacks a genuine intention to do something about it, to alleviate their pain. You know, so this is often, I mean, it happens to me a lot when you especially watch what's happening overseas in many other different countries. You see all the different forms of suffering that goes on. And you might just say, oh, those poor people. And that's it. Another near enemy, and this is like sort of like on the way, but sort of indifference or this apathy. So now we're really close to like moving away from near and we're moving to the far. So as you know, indifference or apathy is just not caring. You don't really care. So this is like, you know, we're going after the opposites of compassion, not caring, not feeling, trying not to feel what the other person is feeling, try and disregard it altogether so you don't feel distressed. And of course, then you don't, and you don't do anything about it. And finally, we end up in the state of cruelty. So that's far on the far extreme. I mean, no, that's definitely, you know, we can tell that's not a compassionate act or actor.
So Eddie, you know, I mean, it's pretty awful when you sense somebody else pitying you. So is that, I'm just trying to figure out why it feels awful, why everyone hates being pitied, and is it because whoever's feeling that for us, they're kind of going, oh, you know, I'm so sorry for you, but they're not taking any. There's no responsibility from their side to help you. They're just feeling it and then they just walk off, and we feel that like that we're not being helped.
I'm not sure that would contribute.
Because isn't the whole thing about compassion is that you take a responsibility. So then I'm thinking with the pity, there is no responsibility. You just feel sorry and that's
Yeah,
it.
that's right. Yeah, and yeah, like you say, most so that sorry could come out of your own distress, but then you don't want to, you're not going to do anything about it. But you know you should say sorry, so you do. The other one is like with the cognitive empathy. You know, right? You don't even feel it. In fact, you don't want to feel it, but you recognise it's going on. And, oh, you poor dear, and no more. Right? What really, like you say, so when we become distressed because we see that others are pitying us, there's again, I think that really comes back to the grasping itself, and it comes to like some way or other the other person seemed to be better or not responsive or anything like that, and you're looking down at me.
Yeah. And then the middle one, indifference or apathy, that one's really tricky because often if you get so distressed, like this happens to me watching the nature docos, I can't watch I can't watch animals eating each other like just for a second. But I tend to shut down and then go into I don't want to know and then indifference, you know.
That's right.
And so you could kind of think it's neutral and therefore okay, but actually it's neutral and indifferent.
Yeah,
It's
well,
tricky. I find it
when
quite scary looking at that one.
yeah, I mean, this is what many of us do. Yeah, I mean, there are many things we don't want to look at. You know, many forms of different suffering that are really, really challenging, and it can quite affect us on quite, like, you know, this on a deep emotional level. And yeah, so it's like so that we don't want to know. And of course, so this is yeah, you know, when the Buddha taught, especially when he taught the Four Noble Truths, you know, like he came to this this one here, straight off, Look, I want you to acknowledge that suffering exists. It's the first, we call it the first noble truth, the first truth that people have seen directly into reality, comprehend. Suffering exists. But then, as you know, the depth and the width of it is so immense. As Holiness will often say, many other Buddhist teachers will say, and yet, that's the basic level where we're at. Right? We're just sort of like on the surface, the distressing levels of suffering, and some we will acknowledge and others we don't want to acknowledge. And yet there's these two other levels beneath it. Right? It's so deep. And what they're asking us to do is really not just look at the suffering of others, but look at our own. To acknowledge the deep, deep levels of suffering within us. And if we don't acknowledge it, if we don't see it, we can't extend compassion to ourselves. Right? So it's like we leave some dark corners where we just let the hurt keep going on. Right? So it's the idea of seeing the suffering is to create, or to create in a way, a compassionate response to it. And these ways of here, these ways don't really work. Like
No, and
so
also,
often, as I say, often we're quite cruel to ourselves. So I've got a friend in New Zealand, a part Maori girl, and so she said to me, one day I was sort of talking about this, and she just said, what's it called?
Eddie, just stop the share while you.
She said, toughen up.
Hmm.
I thought, yeah, that's right. That's the Maori response. These guys, be a man, be a tough guy. Just toughen up, right?
And also, their cruelty is often a response to weakness and vulnerability, because whoever's being cruel can't bear that, and so rather than feel the hurt of it, or have an empathetic response, it's to shove it down with the cruelty. So emotionally brutalized people, this is how you cope with pain, is by cruelty.
Yeah. So
And that thing, sorry, that thing that you said of, like, just suck it up and harden up, that's a form of cruelty.
Yeah, that's
to
right.
say that.
To say that. Yeah, this is the advice that many people will give you. The other thing about looking at the suffering, what's tremendous about that, on one side is the development of compassion towards yourself, and when you understand this is my situation, you'll know it's the situation of every living being that has a consciousness. Any being that's out of control, not in control of their mind and body, will experience forms of suffering, forms of distress. Yet that's only like half of the picture. Because if you look at what's creating the suffering, what's creating the distress, it's an effect, so it must have a cause. The causes must be supported with conditions. What are they? So when you look deeply into that, then you see that the major causes of it are our misapprehension of it. That's so I love it. There's a lovely section of one of those books where the Dalai Lama says, so on one side the suffering exists, but on the other side it's like, yeah, but you can't find it when you look for it. It's only when you don't look. Then suddenly it's like you're assailed by it. And you don't even know that you're being assailed by it because of the way you're presently looking at it. You're thinking it exists in this way in which it doesn't. If you could actually see, like, really look for the source of your suffering, it'll vanish. There is none to be found. And right there's the freedom. So we need to, like I said, the Four Noble Truths, this type of, with the compassion towards suffering, is just dealing with the first, noble truth, isn't it? That suffering exists, is really uncomfortable. Yet it has these causes. What are they? When we see, anything that's causal is actually empty of any intrinsic nature. Wow, I didn't know that. Let's get familiar with the empty side.
Eddie, you've got just under half an hour left.
Yeah. So let's have a look now then at, we're just calling ordinary compassion. This is compassion that we have got now. And this is what we can use to make stronger and refine and develop and so forth. Now, so ordinary people like us, we are compassionate. If we ask ourselves, like, to who? Well, towards yourself sometimes. Many times, in fact. Anytime you're hurt, you try to ameliorate or change it or do something about it. That's an expression of compassion towards yourself. Then you look at your children. If your children are hurt, harmed in any way, you want to try and put an end to it. You'll make an effort to do it. That's compassion. If you're in a partnership and your partner is hurt in any way, you're willing to step up and, what can I do? How can I help? Let's go to the doctor. Right? We act. So our compassion is primarily extended towards friends and relatives and those who help them, those people we think are good. Right? We will extend our compassion to them. So everybody is like that. Right? So we call this is ordinary compassion. Now, what ordinary compassion is it's mixed in with a couple of things. One of them is this attachment, and then there's expectation. So, especially, like I said, to attachment to oneself, to one's family, to one's friends, towards people that we think are good in some way. And we have expectations about these different people and of ourselves. So here I put this picture up where you can see a father helping his son study. And here we have, because they're related, familiar, through family, there is attachment there as well as love and kindness. But it's like my son. And he expects things from his son. So there's care there, there's the stepping up, there's the willingness to help, all that's there. And yet in with it is expectation and attachment. So I'm sure your parents had these views towards you, and you probably had yours towards your children, right? So, there's this care. You remember when you didn't meet your parents' expectations? You remember when your own children or your spouses didn't meet your expectations? How what we call compassion changed. How you lost it, compassion vanishes and something else replaces it. And this is just how it is for all of us, like ordinary people. So I came across a great analogy of what attachment is like. So many years ago, when Miffy's mother was alive, she was describing one of the.
Stop the share so we can see you.
Thank you. She was describing one of our students, and she was sort of trying to think of how to describe the way she was, and she said, "Oh, she's sticky. She's sticky." And I was what does that mean? What do you? I'm trying to, see it in my mind. How, like, and then it was like this, how like I just felt like that, like something sticking to you. So she's like, let me say, people living in your pocket, like they're always wanting something off you or from you. And this was their primary way of relating to you. So they'd often talk to you about their problems and suffering. And no matter what you could do to help was like, yeah, but if I'm helped, then I can't stick. I'm away from you, like it's solved, right?
It's sometimes it's called being needy,
Yeah,
and being needy is the way that you make the connection with others. And then if you're not special and don't have a problem and don't need, then you don't have any connection.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's like the stickiness. So it's in this example I saw the other day from the Pali Abhidhamma, it says attachment is a mental state that sticks to its object as meat sticks to a hot frying pan. I'm sure. So I remember that. Right, trying to really get the scraper under it, like lift it up, right? Get it off there. And this is the other part I liked it. It said, the attachment is always accompanied by confusion, agitation, lack of integrity, and lack of consideration for others. Its attachment is shrouded it's unclear. Whereas true compassion is always bright, it's clear, and it's without limits. Without limits. That's a big one, and this clarity that you actually want to help them. It's not something that you want from them, and that's why you're helping them. So out there are plenty of examples, or at least I've read plenty of them, where people, well, especially in the Dharma, but also in other religions and other places where people are to be helped. So people want to help others, and they go there and they work to help others. But there's something quite appealing about the suffering of someone else, especially when you can help them, when you are seen as valuable to them. So then the sticky thing comes in, isn't it? You find doctors or nurses having relationships with their parent, with the patients, which is meant to be like a no-no. So we sort of overstep the boundaries. It's not just about the other, it's about what I can get to.
Eddie, is that like some kind of, it's like a slow kind of degeneration that you go from helping the person to then feeling good that you've helped someone to then being attached to feeling good. And so it goes, the focus slowly shifts back to yourself.
Yeah, that's right. And then you want the object to be near you to feel good. So, your sense of value is always appreciated.
And I think that a hierarchy situation is set up then.
Yeah, yes, for sure, Barbara. That's like the sort of pity coming down, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. Because when you feel pity for someone, or when I feel that someone is pitying me, that's very disempowering.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. That's right.
And you can also tell if this is happening, I think, because then if the person is suddenly rude to you, or if they sense that it's pity and they just don't, then you get all upset, like how very dare they throw back my attentions, or everything I've done to help you and what do I get in return, all that kind of thing comes in.
Yeah. And so again, so this is where we see the attachment in play. Like, so I think Rabina said, anger is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So you think you might be, oh no, I'm really compassionate, but in there is the attachment, and then the person behaves in a way that you didn't expect. They don't meet your expectation, and now you respond with anger. So now, there I can see my compassion is mixed in with attachment. And like, I saw that picture of this man here trying to help his child, and I was going, oh man, I keep thinking of how I behave towards my own parents, and the attachment. I kept thinking, I can't have kids, I'll be just like them. Like, to get so upset because your kids don't do what you want them to. I remember this time, like my dad told me, don't do this thing, and what it was to swing from the rafters of the shed. So as soon as his back was changed, I jumped up, grabbed the rafter and tried to do my Tarzan act, because I'd seen the movie, I knew how to do it, except when I let go of the rafter, I didn't fly across space and get another one. I fell straight to the ground. And there was a broken piece of glass on the ground, and like bang, straight into my head, and the blood was pouring out. And man, my dad hit me. Like he was so upset, right? And so, not only do I get a gash in my head, I get a whack across the head as well. And I thought, see, there you go. Like, his compassion, he didn't want me to, he thought I might get hurt by swinging. And then I did get hurt, and then he hit me. Right? So, I didn't meet his expectations. That's what happened. And I'm sure that happens with many, many parents.
Time is overing.
Okay, time is over. Let's move on. So what can we do about this? So come up with this idea. It's not my idea, but there is a technique where we can transform the ordinary. So we take the ordinary, so they're on the side here, these 7 people, groups of people, our elders, our peers, the juniors, the enemies of our elders, our own enemies, and the enemies of the juniors, and the natural people. So on the right-hand side, this describes, who the elders are, who the peers are, and so forth. Let's do, I'll take you through this meditation now. It will only take a few minutes. So we can do that, and we can look back at the slide. And this technique comes out of, what would you call it? The ancient ways of the Chinese practice Buddhism. So, we've got Tibetan Buddhism, we've got Chinese Buddhism, we've got the Zen, we've got the Japanese, there's many of them. This is one of the techniques they use. So let's try it out. So just get comfortable in your seat. You can have your eyes closed or open. And I want you to start thinking about the older people you know. Perhaps even like maybe when you're a child, or even now, your elders. People that you've known throughout this life. So recall each person who's taken care of you. Like when you were young, they were the elder. So recalling people who took care of you, who raised you, who taught you. Others who guided you, who are older and guided. And those who protected you. Think of any good role model who's older than yourself. And you think of the many ways they influenced your life in a positive way. And then think, you know, my elders have done so much for me. They have raised and taught me. Some have risked their life for me. They have selflessly helped me. So it seems natural that we would try to repay their kindness. But we don't do that. Instead, we often argue with them. We make them angry. We cause them to worry. We don't listen to them. We treat them rudely. And we don't appreciate all they have done to help us during this life. So this is all true, and we're bringing it out into the light. We're acknowledging it. We're putting it down. We regret what we've done. Now, just take a moment to think of all the good things you've done. So these elders have helped us accumulate merit. Let us dedicate it to them. Let's dedicate all of our goodness towards our elders. Let's share our goodness with our elders. And by doing it, think, may my elders' suffering cease, and may they attain full awakening. Then you take a moment to think about all the elders that you've had in past lives. They're uncountable. You think, just as we've had parents and teachers in this life who are older than us, we've had parents and teachers in previous lives. And we don't know who they are now because all of us have been reborn. Still, they were kind to us. And so we dedicate whatever merit we've created to return the kindness to them. I think, may all the elders of my past and present have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they all be free from suffering and its causes. May they always have higher realm rebirths, achieve liberation and enlightenment. May they all abide in the great equanimity. And then breathing in through your nostrils, exhale through your mouth, and we just drop what we've been thinking about and return to spaciousness. So we just do this as a very simple way to take whatever compassion we have at present, and we just go through each of these categories, and we just do something like we just did. We recollect their kindness, and we wish to repay their kindness. And the first way to do it is no more harm to them, no more hurt to them. If I can help you in any way, let me help you, but no more hurt. Which leads us right to our next slide, which is called decisions. And what this is about, as you can see, is like, you know, we're really busy people and there's so much going on in our lives and there's so many people. So it seems to me that sometimes, is it compassion for myself or compassion for the other? Where should I focus? Do I really focus on benefiting myself, or is it on others? Now, as you know, we're engaged in a practice of compassion, really sort of within the corpus of the Mahayana teachings. But the Mahayana is built on what they call the Hinayana, and many of our teachings and exercises are shared with the teachings of the lower scopes. So we have to begin with ourselves until we get strong enough to do it for others. So it's not self or other, it's both. And we got to work it out ourselves, right? In a way you could say we're not separate from others, are we? We're a part of, we can be included within all. Self and others is all. So we're a part of the group.
Eddie, when we're doing this, is it a bit like this seesaw where we do a bit of work on ourselves and a bit of extending ourselves to others and backwards and forwards and like that? Or is it just, a few years one way and a few years another way? Like, how do we actually plot it out?
Well, the first place to start it is like with yourself, and try and acknowledge how deeply the suffering states are within you, how they affect you. From there, it doesn't take you to be a genius to go, oh my gosh, but everybody's just like me. So whenever you they say the most effective way of caring for yourself is to care for others, because you're both included there, right? You will help yourself by caring for the others. So it's not like either or. It's if you actually try and help the others, even mentally, you help yourself. So here's Holiness says, holding the view that benefiting self and benefiting others are mutually exclusive is restrictive. Seen from a broader perspective, intelligently benefiting others also aids us. When we help others, we immediately witness others experiencing the good results of our actions. Our actions cause the environment in which we live to be more pleasant. In the same way, wisely benefiting ourselves aids others. Maintaining good health and keeping ourselves well balanced physically and mentally creates a better atmosphere for all those we encounter. It also gives us more energy to share with others, and enables us to practice the Dharma more consistently for the benefit of all. Thus, in the Pali Canon, the Buddha praises those who work for both their own welfare and the welfare of others. So I've got this thing called Hurry Slowly, which I drew out of the book. Because I know like we want to help each other, we want to help others, don't we? But sometimes it's like how and when. So this is a little table, right? So on this side, as you can see, is self. It's about us. It's about the other, and then what behavior should we engage in. So when we will not be disturbed, we feel quite confident in ourselves, coming from a good place. Okay? And the other person is not prone to anger, and they're not attached to their view. Then that's a great time to speak, isn't it? That's quite likely we'll get across. Now we're looking at this now, so we're going to go down, and I won't be disturbed by the situation. The other person is not prone to angry outbursts, and they're not all that firmly attached to their views. They have a view, but they're not all that firmly attached. Be careful, they weren't attached at all. Then speak.
This table says that they are prone to angry outbursts, but they're not firmly attached.
Where? Which one?
It just says is prone.
Yeah. So they are prone, but they're not firmly attached. So they could, we know that they could fire up, but they're, but could go either way here, but they're not firmly attached to views. When people are really firmly attached to views, they're very likely to fire up, right? And here we are, we're becoming, here's our thing there. Now we might be troubled if we try to do something. So they're not so prone here to anger, but they are attached to views. So we should speak. We think of something, now we will be disturbed by this, what's going to happen if we interact with them. It's quite likely we could be upset here. But still, we think we can make a difference. Now the person is prone to anger and they do have attachment. Necessary to try and speak. But this one here, we just don't do it. So when we know ourselves, this is a really difficult situation, we're likely to be disturbed. In fact, we will be disturbed. We don't feel confident at all. The other person is easily angered. They are strongly attached to their views. Then just back away, understand it. Yep, person suffering, and there's very little I can do about it. I cannot act right now. Remember when Corey was telling us when somebody gets really angry, I think it's like 10 minutes or so, do not try and help. You need a 10-minute period
because
of break.
anything that you say within that period when someone's all fired up, it's just going to make them more angry, not less.
That's
But
right.
this is really interesting. This line, this delineation, it's kind of like where we know things may not go well, but we still, care and we think we can help. And so we're willing to kind of bear it if things don't work out or if they get cross with us.
Yeah.
And that's the line, like, well, we've got the confidence, but a confidence of our convictions or confidence of our skill. And then the line, if we don't have the confidence, then don't go there.
You guys, when you look at this table, you probably find, probably a good way to go to is with examples, isn't it? So, like if your child is, imagine you've got a teenage daughter or son, and they've done something that's been really unskillful, hurt others, done something silly. So we know, God, I've got to talk to them. Like, this is really hard for me to do. Well, I have to. And I think, I can still talk to them. Then we know also, like our child is prone to an angry outburst. They don't want to hear what mum or dad has to say. And they are attached to their views. They've got strong views about, who they are, as every teenager has, right? Still, we have to try, don't we? We know that not saying anything is not going to do any good here. I have to make an attempt. I have to try to talk to them about this.
That's a great example, Eddie, because this is what I did. That I'd have fierce arguments with my mother, and she probably just shook her head in despair. But afterwards, later on, like a month later, or when I was talking with other people, I would find I would be saying what she said, and I'd be horrified. I never told her, which is pretty mean on my part, because it might have actually made it feel a bit better.
Yeah, so the Buddha says this, monastics, go and travel around for the welfare of the multitude, for the happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world and for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of devas and humans. Let not two go the same way. Teach the Dharma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. So saying, so talking to the monastic community, and saying that go out there and help others, out of compassion for the world. Out of compassion for the world, take my teachings into the world. And don't let the two of you go together in the same way. Like, go alone in these different directions. And teach what I've taught, the path of non-harmfulness, the path of trying to help the other. And in fact, it was compassion itself that fuels the Buddha's decision to teach, and then his way of living. So the way of living, as you probably know, with the ordained is simple. Again, from In Praise of Great Compassion, on page 289, His Holiness says, because he was free from attachment, he could have lived in a comfortable setting without incurring any faults. However, out of compassion for future generations of practitioners, he continued to live a simple lifestyle as a monastic. He usually dwelled in the forest, wore patched robes, and went on alms to receive food. In this way, he set an example for future practitioners who also live a simple lifestyle and practice sense restraint. So compassion fuels the decision to teach. Compassion fuels the lifestyle. Compassion is the underlying motive to engage with the world, to engage with people, to help them put it into their suffering, and to not contribute any of your own, to do the best you can, not to add any more suffering to theirs. And in fact, it really can help them to diminish theirs. But of course, I kind of like this idea. I thought, it doesn't require us to put on special clothes or to appear in a certain way, is it, to help another person? We just turn up as we are, ordinary, and we listen. And if it's the right time to speak, we speak. We help simply. And if that's not possible, if we're at home alone, we don't see many people, nevertheless, it does not stop us thinking well of other people, to thinking of all the good things that they've done for us, to wish them not to experience harm, to wish them not to experience suffering. So this has brought us to the end of our day's class. So our takeaway, what's our takeaway? So compassion is not emotional empathy. It's not sentimentality or pity. And compassion mitigates suffering. It allays suffering. We're trying to put an end to suffering. We're trying to stop our own suffering or the suffering of someone else. So till next week, find anything you can. If you have books at home which have sections in compassion, please read them and bring whatever queries you have to our next meeting. Have a look at some of the different teachings on compassion. Practice it at home. Even just 3 or 4 minutes thinking kindly of somebody who is suffering, and you know they are if they're not enlightened. They're wishing that they be free of it, and be willing to help them be free of it. So this, I'm glad you're all here. I'm glad it was a great talk. And thank you. So let's dedicate our merit towards achieving great compassion and enlightenment. So due to the merits of these virtuous actions, quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings abide, may I too remain to dispel the sorrows of the world. And wishing that we get a chance to see the return of our precious Lama. Pray for Rinpoche's swift return. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, O Venerable Guru, to you I make this request.
Oh.
Okay. So class what you mean. Thank you very much for being here. Hi, Kate. Thank you, Barbara, Susan, and Lou. It's really great to see you all again. Let's keep it up. Hi, Michael. Okay, guys. Stay alive. Let's see each other.